Welcome to a recorded version of the June 9th Focus Community Engagement Session number 4. Focus, which stands for Future of Crystal Lake Library Under Study, is a community-wide effort to gather input and feedback from the community regarding different aspects of the future and possible options for improving library service. Tonight's presenters are Joe Huberty, Partner, Engberg Anderson Architects; Carl Anderson, Chief Estimator, Gilbane Building Company; and Andrew Kim, Director, Public Finance, PMA Securities. The evening begins with an overview of previous sessions by Focus Co-Chair Robert Reisenbuckler.
Our engagement session in April, our topic was, Are We Future Ready? There, we focused on the needs and wants of our community for our library's facility needs. In May, our last one, the topic was, Our Facility Does Form Follow Function? Here, we took those needs and wants that you told us from community engagement session number 2 and turned them into actual facility options. Tonight's session will focus on What About the Money? You will hear speakers tonight who will discuss the value of the different facility options that we came up with, that you helped us come up with in Community Engagement Session 3, and how to finance these potential options. We'll hear from Joe Huberty from Engberg Anderson Architects. We'll hear from Carl Anderson from Gilbane Building Company, and Andrew Kim from PMA Securities. And of course, last but not least, we will always hear from you, and this Community Engagement Session number 4 will be no exception. We will engage you in a small group activity at the end of our session. Tonight, as with the other sessions, you will receive a copy of the informational PowerPoint presentation and any supplemental data or materials. You should already have those at your table. Then, following tonight's session, as we've done with each and every one, a set of documents will be produced that will later help us in creating a final report that we will give to the Board of Trustees. These documents include verbatim responses from each small group's worksheet and an executive summary reflecting the collective work of all the participants at each and every session. The upshot there is we want your feedback, we want your input, and we're listening. As with Community Engagement Session 2 and 3, much of the material that you're here tonight to hear in Community Engagement Session 4 is a direct result of your feedback, questions, and comments that you gave us in the previous engagement sessions. So we thank you for that. And now I'd like to introduce Architect Joe Huberty, who will speak on our topic tonight, What About the Money? Joe is a recognized regional leader in the design of libraries. It was the first building type that inspired him as a young person. Joe attended the architecture school in Paris and holds a Master of Architecture from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where he has also taught several courses. Joe is a partner with Engberg Anderson Architects and has worked with the Crystal Lake Public Library for many years. Those of you who were here in April will remember Joe from his part in the Are We Future Ready presentation. And Joe also presented at our last engagement session entitled Our Facility Does Form Follow Function. So once again, please join me in welcoming Joe Huberty of Engberg Anderson Architects.
All right, how many people were here for Community Engagement Session 3? Okay, about half the room. Okay, I'm going to try not to repeat everything you heard last time, but for the people that are new, we're going to have a little bit of a refresher because it's important as we consider the underlying thought process tonight, what defines the best value for Crystal Lake. We want to talk about both needs and cost. The big information tonight, of course, is cost, but the cost calculations are based on assessing how best to meet the service needs within the community. So we're going to start out with a recap of what we discussed as a group coming out of Community Engagement Session 2, Are We Future Ready? And at that session, you'll recall we talked about a lot of potentials that other communities have explored, what the state of the art in the library world might be, and tried to think through what made sense for Crystal Lake. And you helped to put together this list. What are the functions that make sense here in Crystal Lake? How do we make sure that we are, in fact, future ready? And those needs really fell into two categories. On the left, in white, are those sorts of things that you can address in a building of any size. They're qualitative. You want to make the space that you have perform at a certain level. On the right, in yellow, are those things that are essentially space dependent. At some point, if you want to accomplish an awful lot of different activities, you need a fair amount of space to address all of those needs. If you don't have that space, you start to engage in a series of service trade-offs. And so as we looked at the potential options for the building, we wanted to keep track of which qualitative aspects we could address and which quantitative aspects we could address with each of those schemes. With that information, we stepped back a little bit and thought about future readiness. It's always tempting to fall into the what do we need today kind of mentality, and ultimately the success of any library is its ability to adapt to future service needs in an easy, simple, direct, and low-cost manner. So when we thought about future-friendly attributes, we were thinking about schemes that were really easily adapted to new technologies, changes in how people consume information, changes in the way that libraries help to build a community. And so we came up with flexibility, adaptability, and a way to make sure that the costs of this library service to the community could always be as low as possible and still be effective. So that's what we mean by operational economy. That became a score sheet for thinking about some of the sort of pretty picture versions of those bigger aspirations. We talked about the desire and the need, in fact, for a ground level entry into the building. That was first on everyone's list. It was a universal expression of a need. We talked about the ability to extend the library services 24/7 in recognition of a contemporary lifestyle. Resonating with most people was the desire for a children's play space, recognizing the need to address the wide variety of ways in which our youngest patrons learn, engage their world, and observe and practice with hands-on techniques. We talked about the ability of the library to conduct a larger number of meetings and hold events that support more attendees. We're really thinking about Mrs. Claus as an excellent example of that need for a larger meeting room. But the simple fact is that libraries more and more need the ability to support multiple concurrent meetings. And that was high on the group's list. At the other end of the spectrum was a need for small group activity rooms, sometimes for study, sometimes for small group projects. These are areas that isolate activity and all the noise and energy that goes along with those from the rest of the building. So there's a wide variety of sizes and shapes. We talked about an ability to expand the collection and to present it in a way that made sense to users. Part of that sense was arranging the collection on stacks that weren't so high and didn't necessarily need to use the lowest shelf. So not only do you have the books, they're easy to find, easy to access. That resonated with a large segment of the population. We talked about exploiting the potential embodied in technology and bringing that to the user's fingertips throughout the building, and not just for technology consumption, but to use technology to be creative and to share original ideas. We talked about the building as a place for people, and this resonated as well. The desire for more and more varied seating opportunities, so that whether you come as an individual or as a group, if you're seeking quiet or seeking activity, you could find those kinds of spaces that made sense to you on the day of your visit. We talked about libraries as buildings and the desire for a building that actually worked well as a building. So better quality lighting, better quality mechanical systems to be comfortable in your building and know that it wasn't consuming an inordinate amount of energy in order to provide that quality of lighting and quality of mechanical comfort. Another goal was to use technology to minimize operating expense or to divert your operating capital to areas where it had the most impact, thinking about the quality of the library service as a user rather than as a material handling exercise. So automated sorting was on the highest priority list. All of those together, as a result of your efforts, became a mosaic of a picture of what the library in Crystal Lake could be. And from that point, we stepped into the next aspect. How do we achieve that shared vision of a library for this community? And we identified 4 options. And the goal here is really to accomplish as much as we can of that shared vision, that mosaic, with as little effort as is possible. You don't want to go overboard. So we're going to try and find the scheme that actually realizes those goals and minimizes the expense. And we came up with 4 major concepts: repair what you have, renew it, which is basically repair it and do a little tweaking. We thought to add a little bit of space. To expand the building dramatically, and then to just start over. And the thought there is at some point you decide that the effort put into expanding a building, renewing it, isn't getting you far enough or is costing you too much, and it might be simpler, easier, more pragmatic to start over. So that was the fun part, and then we asked Carl Anderson to step into the picture. Carl is a director of estimating for Gilbane Construction Company. He's a graduate from Purdue University, and in his storied career, he's estimated over $1 billion worth of public sector projects, which is an amazing amount. So I'm going to turn this over to Carl now, and he's going to walk us through his estimating process. I'm going to function as Carl's microphone stand.
All right, thank you, Joe. So I thought we'd start off here by defining our cost categories. The first category here, building, refers to exactly that. It's the building. It's the nuts and bolts of the building. And when we talk about the building, we're talking about the foundations, the structure, the masonry, the outside walls, the windows, and then the mechanical systems and the electrical systems within the building. Okay? One of the questions we get asked often is, why is this building, this library, so much more expensive than my house? And it has to do with the requirements for an institutional building over a residential building. The institutional building demands a higher level of standards and requirements, higher codes. They have to abide by the ADA codes, Americans with Disabilities Act, and they often have more durable materials. I've heard that our library has up to 900 people a day going through it, and that 925, right? And so obviously the doors, the floors, everything's got to be durable to accept all these people coming through the building every day. Often institutional buildings are more complex than a residential building, and all these factors play into the cost of the institutional building. So some examples of institutional over residential, the plumbing materials. In an institutional building, you're going to use heavy-duty copper and cast iron pipe, whereas in residential, you're going to use plastic and PVC. The HVAC systems are going to be more complex with greater control systems. Your home probably doesn't have a fire suppression system, fire sprinklers. Those are required in our institutional buildings, along with elevators and higher-end electrical systems and special lighting controls. So these all play into the cost and the cost associated with the institutional buildings. Okay, so site development is really just what it says. It's all the costs associated with the site. The parking is one thing. The utilities that go through the site, so the electrical, the gas, the storm. I've got up here stormwater management. When we build parking lots and roofs and impervious surfaces, we're required to offset all the stormwater that comes in. So our project actually has to have a stormwater retention tank below the parking lot. Our landscaping is part of the site costs, and then requirements for access by the fire department. So those are all built into the site costs. The furnishings and technologies, so the furnishings are all the items within the building, the shelving, the tables, the chairs, and then the technology, the AV, the media that goes into some of the AV systems, the digital signage. Moving and temporary lighting, you'll see as we go through the pricing, a lot of these options have a cost associated with the moving. And then the other component to that is, so this is moving of the collection or storing of the collection. The other component to that is the temporary library. So our options 2 and 3 that we're looking at would actually have a temporary library for up to potentially 2 years. So the costs associated with the temporary library would include not only renting temporary space, but moving into that space and then making that space accessible and ready for use by the public for a library. And then this last category, other, it includes our contingencies, our escalations, fees, testing, and permits. The biggest chunk of this is going to be the escalation and contingencies. And so we actually started working and budgeting this project with Joe and with Crystal Lake over the past 6 months. And we know quite a bit of information, but we're still in the very beginning of the design. We're probably 10% into design. And so we feel like we've got a handle on what the projects are going to be and how to price them up appropriately, but there's still a lot of design to go. And so these contingencies are going to help us bridge the gap from today until we actually complete the design and go on into construction. So the contingency is there, and eventually that'll go down to 0, and that'll work its way into the project costs. And then the escalation is similar to that, where we're trying again to predict what costs are going to do over the next couple of years. We're actually not starting construction on this project for over a year. So as you all know, the price of goods and materials continues to go up. So this escalation factor is a way to try to estimate what those costs are going to do over the next couple of years while we're designing and getting ready to build the project. The fee category is architect, engineering fees, construction manager, general contractor fees, and then testing and permits are also in here. Okay? I'll pass it back to Joe here.
Those are a lot of potential costs, and what we wanted to do is take the information that we had pulled together over the previous 6 months and start to apply them to the various schemes in a ratio that reflects the complexity of those designs. And we started out with the most simple approach, which is to repair the existing building. And for the most part, you wouldn't recognize too many changes to the building. These are all things that go into making the building sound, resisting gravity, keeping the elements out, making sure that you can turn the lights on, and that sort of thing. So we talked a lot about core and shell, fancy architect words for bricks, walls, windows, roofs, the mechanical system, lighting, power, and data. We walked through that with the notion that the building in its current state represents 4 decades worth of an effort to provide library service in the community, and at some point, those investments start to wear out. So the oldest parts of the building at the far east end of the building tend to need more work than the most recent portions, but at some level, they all need to be tuned and brought up to a standard that would allow you to operate for at least another 20 years in a way that's safe, efficient, productive. There's a limit to what we can do within that scheme because, as we've talked about previously, the floor-to-floor heights in the building really limit our ability to address several key performance concerns, lighting and mechanical distribution being key. And then ultimately, the biggest challenge here is it's still only a 40,000 square foot building. We mentioned those limitations. They're really a result of not just floor area, but floor-to-floor height. Those of you who were here last time remember me waxing on with no end about the importance of a tall building and the ability to conceal a robust mechanical system, electrical systems, fire suppression, data, all within a space that doesn't interfere with the space that we all as people want to occupy. So on the right-hand side of the drawing, you see the desired goal, 16 feet from the first floor to the second floor. And that gives us about an 11-foot clear ceiling, lots of good light distributed, lots of fresh air moving through the space. What we have in the existing building is under 11 feet from one floor to the next, and we're living with about 8 feet between the floor and the ceiling. That will work in a small building. It's really problematic at anything approaching the 40,000 square feet that you have. And it really puts a lot of pressure on the mechanical system. So when we say it's hard to improve the quality of mechanicals, it's hard to improve the quality of lighting, it's really a result of this building section. We do get to do a little bit with the site. The existing site has some issues with settlement. There's an old settlement on top of an ash pit at the far east end of the site. But we can attempt to address that. And at that point, we stop. This is the let's go in with a low-cost approach and see how far we get. And so this was option 1. We talked about the performance of that scheme. On our objective scale of qualitative and quantitative performance, we got 3.7 out of the possible 22 points. That's roughly 17% of the points. So these were the scoring criteria that we set out as a group earlier, and we tallied them up, and the performance was 3.7. A way to picture that is to look at all of those aspirations that we set out for Crystal Lakes Library and think about the ones we could address. So we're not getting anything that's quantitative, and we can do a limited amount to address the qualitative aspects of lighting and mechanical distribution. But by virtue of that floor-to-floor height, we're only affecting a portion of this interior quality of space. So keep this visual in mind as you think about the needs part of that value equation. Now we get to the good stuff.
So the budget on repair option 1 is $9.1 million is the total. And then going back to those 5 buckets, the building cost would be $5 million. Site development, the $300,000 that you see there has to do with repairing the existing parking lot. And then moving on down the line there, furnishings and technologies, 1.5. A little bit of moving and storage of materials, and then the other category, 2.2. And I do just want to clarify at the top there, the 40K SF, that stands for 40,000 square feet. So that's your existing building, it's just getting repaired. And it's also important to point out that this would just be the same building, no new insulation, no new technology with the MEP system, so not as energy efficient as some of the other options that you're going to see here.
So we take that $9.1 million as our denominator in our value equation, and we come up with a value index of 0.406. That means nothing until we get to compare it with some of the other schemes, but just keep that in mind. That we've got a minimal performance and we've got a significant investment to achieve that. And that's really just to maintain the physical integrity of the building. Our first point of comparison was the thought that we could renew the building, accomplish everything that we've outlined up to this point, and then introduce a small addition to the north side of the building that creates a new entry and a replacement for the Ames Room, which is slowly being eroded away and becomes smaller with every remodeling. The challenges remain the same. There's limitations to what we can do because the floor-to-floor height in most of the building doesn't change. But we do start to address some of those big picture concerns that a lot of people expressed. We've brought the entry down to the grade level at the north parking lot, and we've introduced an easily accessible Ames Room that can be used before or after normal library hours. We've done that by reorganizing the lower level, moving some plumbing, providing better access to mechanical systems. We're going to replace your existing electric heating system with a hot water boiler system, much more efficient, much easier to control, and that'll help us in some regards with comfort, but it really doesn't eliminate the challenges introduced by those small ducts running above the ceiling. So the addition to the building is relatively small. It's confined to an area mostly on the north side of the building, and then a small zone for that new mechanical space underneath the current Paddock Street entry plaza. On the upper level, a lot of roof above the new Ames Room, a 2-story lobby that connects to the upper level. That's where you would find the adult services collection, much as it is today. And we replaced the existing Paddock Street entry with an additional adult services space. The challenge by introducing an at-grade entry on the north side of the building is it cuts off the Paddock Street entry. So everyone will be entering the building at grade, but from the north. And so if you were one of those people that really enjoyed that south entry, we've taken that away. Again, the addition is to the north and a small area to the south, really trying to minimize the amount of new construction and testing whether or not through a series of small, almost surgical additions, we can improve the effectiveness of the concept. I'm going to step back for a minute. One of the challenges with that scheme, mid-level entry, is that we're entering not at the lower level and not at the upper level. So when you come into the building, you see that friendly smiling face of your librarian, and you can go to the Ames Room. But after that, it's an elevator ride or a stair trip to either of the primary public service zones. We get to address parking. I think most of the people know that parking is an issue at the library, especially for large events. It will be located north of the existing building. On this diagram, a section through the building really shows the overall concept. We'd be looking to add space north of the building that in many ways encloses the existing hill that you climb during all sorts of inclement weather and replaces it with a series of stairs that let you make that trip in a controlled, tempered environment. So our entry into the building off of parking is at grade. This is where the Ames Room would be, and then you go upstairs to adults or downstairs to youth services. That scheme in our evaluation actually did a much better job, more than double the performance points. And so when you think about the services that you were hoping to achieve, a much better performance. We get our entry level, we get our improved meeting spaces. It's still not quite what you would describe as current or contemporary. We found a way to introduce drive-up services, a drive-up drop-off, after-hours vending. There's a little bit more space for adult services, and we've got the room to introduce that automated materials handling system. So staff time will be used much more efficiently. So this does do a little bit more than just repair the building. It's important to note that it doesn't go all the way towards some key goals. When we talk about improving the meeting room scenario, we've reclaimed what you once had. The Ames Room is back in terms of its original size. It isn't expanded, there aren't multiple meeting venues. And when we talk about more computers, I added that little bit of space where the Paddock Street entry used to be, and by no means does it meet a contemporary sort of standard for all of the various forms of technology within a building. So we've got a portion of those objectives, but not entire accomplishment.
All right, so the numbers for option two, renew, are $15.8 million. You'll see the square footage has gone up a little bit. As Joe had mentioned, there's an addition associated with this option. And then the site costs have gone up to pick up the additional parking and rework in the parking lot. And again, furnishings technology is a little higher. We're starting to see some additional money here now in moving and temporary libraries. So our assumption in this case is that we're actually creating a temporary library somewhere and renting space, and that would be on the order of about a year for a temporary library. And that's, again, $15.8 million for that option.
When you take that cost and divide it into the performance point, we came up with a value index that was a slight improvement, 0.47 compared to 0.0. And you can see the importance of a value index calculation. We certainly made a big improvement in performance, but we saw a corresponding jump in cost. And those two really start to offset one another. And the jump in the overall value isn't really analogous to that increase in performance. You're going to invest an awful lot of money to get a slight increase in performance. And that's why we like to tie performance and cost together. Our third option was expand the building, and this time really mean it. This wasn't nibbling around the edges. The thought here is to essentially double the size of the building, actually a little bit more than double the size of the building. On the north side, at the lower level, we'd be entering at grade again, essentially at grade. This would become adult services. There would be another level, the upper level, where we'd expand the Paddock Street level out to the north. This would become youth and staff space. Again, we lose the Paddock Street entry because everyone is entering from the north. But on this level, you're entering into a building that's built to contemporary library planning standards. And your first sense of the first half of the building is, this is a brand new building, because essentially it is. So we've got the tall floor-to-floor heights. We do a much better job of distributing power, data, mechanical systems in that half of the building. The legacy portion of the building, the existing building, still has all of the challenges. So we've got a mixed bag, half and half. And here you see the challenges. You'll remember this diagram from the last session. And we've got a few challenges where the buildings are knit together. We've essentially got a two-story building that has 3 levels. And we've got a little bit of a level change when you come into the vestibule. There'd be a ramp and a small set of stairs to bring everybody down, but then you're in a modern library space. This seam is an issue. It'll affect staffing, it affects our air movement, it affects how we design mechanical systems. It has some cost implications up front and cost implications as you occupy and own this building for many generations. So the seam isn't to be taken lightly. It does allow us to expand the parking a bit more than the existing site, but because our addition is bigger, we don't get as many parking places as we did in option 2. Overall, we came up with a performance index of 16.6 performance points. Again, a pretty significant increase in performance because this time we're able to address a lot of the quantitative needs that the community has expressed. And when we think about this, the only one that we haven't done a really good job of is improving the mechanical lighting systems in the building. Technically, we've gotten a little bit of that because half of the building is built to new standards, but we haven't addressed it entirely.
Okay, so costs on the expand option, 93,000 square feet, which includes partial addition and renovation of the existing. 35.5 million. You can see the bulk of this is in the building cost. Again, we've got the parking there, as Joe said, and then now we're picking up the full scope of the library furnishings and technology. And then under the other category, the 9.2, again, that's a majority of that is contingency and escalation. And then, as I said before, that's also fees, permits, insurance, and other items. Okay, so 35.5 for the expand option.
You do our little value calculation, and you can see the significant jump in performance is matched by an equal jump in cost, and it brings our value index to 0.46. That's actually a little bit less than our 0.47 for redo. That's essentially a wash. You'd have to contemplate the value of taking the short approach, minimum improvement, significant cost. This one, at least for a significant amount of money, gets you a long way towards your ultimate performance goals, 16.6. We compared that to a replacement strategy, build a new building at the far north end of the McHenry Avenue site at the intersection with Crystal Lake Avenue. It allows us to develop parking to the south of the site, and it allows us to build a new building with all the inherent efficiencies. That arrangement on the site is an important aspect in thinking about the parking needs of the community in this area. It positions the parking so that it works well for major events at both the library and at Husband School. So if you're thinking about the space crunch for parking in the area, this is an option that not only gives you quantity of parking, but also addresses a strategic concern that many in the community have had for a long time, given the level of activity within the neighborhood. The benefits, of course, are pretty straightforward. This will be our most efficient building. It's actually a bit smaller than our addition concept, about 12% smaller. That translates into lower construction costs. It'll translate into lower operating expenses. It'll translate into simpler staffing patterns. And so those are important considerations over the long haul. It also gives us an opportunity to live in the existing building while a new building is constructed. And then once that building is in place, we can come back, demolish it, and then construct the new parking lots to the south. So there's a lot of implementation aspects of this in addition to the long-term strategic performance of the building that are appealing. Our score for this one was just short of perfection, philosophically averse to calling anything perfect. But this scheme does score pretty well, almost 22 points out of the 22 possible. We're docking it for a few points because by virtue of the size of the building, we're not quite to the same level of parking to building area ratio that we could have achieved in one of the smaller schemes. So in some ways it's suffering by virtue of the simple math. But in fact, you get a very efficient, very strategically located block of parking that makes the most use out of the site, and you get a high functioning building along with it. When you look at the sort of what do we need in our community, this is the scheme that really gets you everything. So I don't have a what disappears kind of slide. This is everything that the community identified in engagement session 2, Are We Future Ready? All of the objectives laid out, those items that scored 50% or higher are achieved in the concept.
Okay, the costs for option 4 replace, the total for that one is $34.1 million. And as Joe had mentioned, the square footage actually goes down. So you can see up there the 93,000 in the expand option versus the 82,000 in the replace option. So again, you've got your same cost categories. And then you'll see down under that option, the moving and temporary library costs. We're only paying for moving the library one time from the existing library over to the new facility. We won't have temporary library costs. We'll be able to keep the library open while the new library is under construction. So again, $34.1 million for the replace option. Well, I've got one more, don't I?
Yeah.
So when you're looking at all the costs together, the relative cost, taking the option 3 expand as the most expensive at 100%, you can see obviously the repair option is the least expensive at 25% of the option 3 expand, and then moving up to the renew option at 44%, and then the replace option at 96%. So there's the comparison of all 4 options.
We did a similar overview with the value calculation. A lot of points, essentially the same cost, a little bit less to construct a new building compared to replace. That increase in performance really is driving the value index up to 0.63. When we get to this point, we recognize that it's hard to decide what the relationships between all of those are, and we do a similar index analysis of the value number. Setting the highest scoring concept to 100, you can see the ratio there. The middle 2 schemes, renew, expand, are about 3/4 of the performance that you would get out of a replacement scheme, and repair falls a little bit short of that. If we were back in school, option 4, getting an A. Option 2 and 3, C's, maybe low C's, probably take that. Option 1, that's a solid D. No one's looking forward to bringing that home to mom and dad. But it gives you a way of sort of taking all of the math and putting into a fairly straightforward, simple comparison between the schemes. It's trying to take the shininess off of the look at what we get, and it's trying not to focus solely on the what does it cost to get there, and tries to relate those two. And it's one way of doing the math, and we all know that there's nothing slipperier than a number. So at this point, in some ways, it's important to step back and for each of you to conduct a little bit of that sanity check and say, does this make sense in my mind? Will this make sense to my neighbors, to my fellow citizens? But this is one way of starting the discussion and thinking about it in a fairly detached and objective way to try and make sense of the various options. One of the things we noticed when we looked at all of those is $34 million, even though it's less than $35 million, is still a big number. And the question is natural, is there anything we can do to get all of those performance points and not spend as much money? And there's a couple of things we looked at. One was the size of the building. As Carl's analysis shows, the quickest way to spend money is to build a bigger building. And when we put together the initial space needs assessment with the community and with the library's consultant, there was a range identified, somewhere between 82,000 square feet and 75,000 square feet, to get all of those things that the community identified as important. So when you think about those needs, if we're going to be a little bit on the generous side, it's 82,000 square feet. If we're going to try and squeeze it up just a little bit, we're in at 75,000 square feet. And the difference there is substantial in terms of the cost to construct the project. There's a savings of almost $3 million. And you don't see a significant dip in the performance. We are giving up a little bit in terms of that wiggle room that the additional space would provide. In terms of the overall organization of the building, the flexibility, the adaptability, it's essentially there. It just takes a little bit more effort. It's nowhere near as compromised as the expand option. And so in many ways, it's possible to think about this as a reasonable way to trim the cost of the project without minimizing its impact. So a smaller building. The other thing we looked at was the notion of implementing the technology into the building over time. One of the things that we really pride the design on is its ability to support emerging technology. So why not take advantage of that and buy technology incremental over a series of 4 years rather than all at once? And so one of the ways to think about minimizing that initial impact and buying things as you need them, when you need them, and in their most current form is to buy the softer things, furniture, technology over time. And this one says technology should be implemented incrementally. When you look at that diagram, we had 82,000 square feet, a full second floor over a first floor. Options 4A and 4B step back. And when we think about a 75,000 square foot building, it's the same lower level first floor with a slightly smaller second floor. And we pull that back from the north end. So your sense of the library is really not changed at all. The big picture is that you've still accomplished your primary goals. And for the people that were asking last time about how soon do we have to get together again and go through another one of these workshops to address our real needs, all of these 4 schemes, 4, 4A, 4B, get you where you want to be. This is a we're done for generations kind of solution, even at 75,000 square feet. We went one step further in 4B and said that in addition to implementing technology over time, we're going to try and reuse more of the library's existing furniture. Some of it isn't ideal, some of it's got a few years on it, more than a few years, but it can be reused at least for another, pick a number of years, 5, 8, 10, and then incrementally, as appropriate, those items can be replaced as well. In option 4, we went all in. It's new furnishings, and it's all of the technology right out of the gate. It's we just want to do this once. We don't want to be coming back incrementally over time. Let's solve our challenges. We've put this off long enough. A and B, try and look at softening the fiscal impact of taking that strategic step, getting all of the important stuff. It's all there, ready to go, plug and play. You just have to get those last few pieces. And so that became our last piece of the analysis. When you do the value indexing and relate those, 4A actually looks pretty good, a little bit better than 4B, and 4 pulls up the end. Still all strategic, still all doing a fine job, outperforming either option 2 or 3, and definitely option 1. So that's the math, and those are the concepts. And right now I'd like to turn this back over to BJ to talk through some of the funding opportunities.
I think Joe and Carl have done a wonderful job of taking a lot of numbers, a lot of information, trying to condense it into a simple PowerPoint presentation and explain it to everybody. And I think they did so in a very, very clear, professional job. So thank you again, gentlemen, for that. What about the money? That's why we're here, the topic for tonight. Before discussing the type of financing that is currently available for the options we just saw, I want to share some recent history regarding the avenues that the library board has already explored to finance potential facility options. We mentioned in Community Engagement Session 1 that in April of 2012, the library board applied for an Illinois Public Library Construction Grant, which, had the library received it, would have financed up to 1/3 of the construction cost for any facility. 49 Illinois public libraries applied for the grant. The criteria for the grant was based on the age of the existing building, the size of the building related to the population, and the economic need that each community showed. The grant was only awarded to a handful of communities. Crystal Lake was not one of those communities. In the fall of 2014, the library board embarked on a development study to determine the giving potential for raising private funds for potential library facility options. The library board hired an outside professional fundraising firm, American City Bureau, who conducted interviews with 33 members of the community. The study, which was concluded in early 2015, determined that potential donors would like to see the community investment in the project prior to making a personal contribution. As Catherine Martins, the director of the Crystal Lake Public Library, puts it, the upshot of that survey was that donors want us to bake the cake first, and that donors will be more than willing then to help frost the cake. Which brings us to our third option, community investment through municipal bonds.
Thank you. So I am here this evening to talk to you about municipal bonds. And I guess that makes me the evil guy who makes money by putting you all into debt. So municipal bonds, what are municipal bonds? They are a loan, essentially, that allows the entity, in this case it would be the city of Crystal Lake, to borrow money, and with that money, the city will build capital projects or infrastructure for the benefit of the city. And essentially, it's a representation of a promise to pay back the bondholders or the investors who ultimately lend the city the money, to pay back that money with interest. The principal amounts plus the interest would then be the debt service that the city owes on a semi-annual basis, typically, to the investors and bondholders of the bonds. Now, those investors who are essentially lending the city the money will receive tax-free income. They are not taxed by the federal government, and in some instances by the state government as well, on the interest that's earned from those municipal bonds. And what that does is then it incentivizes the bondholders to require a lower interest from the borrowing entity, the city. Typically, municipal bonds will mature between 1 and 30 years from the issuance date, although there is a maximum 40-year state statute. The debt service levy, which is the amount that you pay on an annual basis by taxing the constituents of the city, is determined as a percentage of this municipality's equalized assessed valuation. So in brief, the process to issue the bonds, once it's decided on the project and the amount of the project, the bonds will receive a credit rating. In this case, it will be from S&P. The city has a very favorable credit rating of AA+. It's one notch below the highest possible rating for a municipal entity. That essentially is kind of a grade to the investors who are looking to buy the city's bonds that says, you know, these are good bonds. We trust that the city will repay the principal and the interest on the bonds. Then the city council will approve an ordinance to approve the sale of the bonds. And as a home rule unit of local government, the city has the ability to sell the bonds only with council approval. It does not necessarily need voter approval in order to sell the bonds. But in this case, the city has agreed to put forth an advisory referendum to approve the sale of the bonds before they actually do so. The city will sell its bonds via a competitive sale, and essentially what that means is investment banks or broker-dealers throughout the country will compete for your bonds, for the city's bonds, on a particular day, a particular time. And whoever pays the highest price, whichever investment bank is willing to pay the highest price for those bonds, will be awarded those bonds. And included in that price is going to be not only the interest rate that the city is then obligated to pay to the investors, but also the fee to the investment bank for selling the bonds to the ultimate investors. Essentially, the investment bank plays the role of a middleman, buying the bonds from the city directly and then selling the bonds to bondholders and investors. And then approximately 3 weeks after a sale, the bond issue closes and the funds are received for construction. So these are the referendum scenarios that we analyzed based on the numbers that you saw from the gentleman presenting before me. I know it's kind of hard to see, but basically we have 6 different boxes. The 6 different boxes represent the 6 different amounts. You had 4 options plus option 4A and option 4B that were described earlier. So the top left corner is the option 1, which was the $9.1 million option. Then you have the 15.8. Then you have the 31.5, the 31.6, the 34.1, and then the 35.5. So you have each of the different scenarios that were presented earlier. Now within each box, you have 3 kind of sub-options. And the difference between those 3 sub-options is the final term or the length of the bonds. So you can sell the bonds really at any term length within 40 years, but we looked at 3 of probably the more common options in terms of final maturity, and that is 20 years, 25 years, and 30 years. And so if we'll look at for example at the upper right-hand box, the blue box, which is a $31.5 million scenario, and I'm only picking that just because it's the middle number of the 6 options. If you look at the 20-year final term, you'll have a total debt service of roughly $44 million. That's principal and interest. You'll have an average annual debt service of about $2.21 million. And the interest rate on that is going to be 3.4%. That matures in 2037. and the estimated annual tax rate is going to be 0.228. If you look at the option, the 25-year final term option, you're going to have the same $31.5 million in proceeds to do the $31.5 million project. The total debt service that you ultimately pay back to investors goes from $44 million up to $50 million. But the average annual debt service decreases from $2.2 million to about $2 million exactly. The interest rate increases from 3.4% to almost 3.9%, and the annual tax rate is 0.20. And you can see the scenario for the 30-year term kind of increases in the same way. Total debt service jumps to $56 million. Annual debt service comes down to $1.86 million. Interest rate is 4.2%, and the annual tax rate is 0.19. Now, for reference sake, we also added those 3 lines at the bottom of each box. And if you look at a $100,000 home, we put 3 options in there: a $100,000 home, a $200,000 home, and a $300,000 home. So for each option, for each home, we have what it will cost to a taxpayer based on their home value. So if you look at the 20-year final term, for a $100,000 home, the annual levy amount, the annual taxes paid by the homeowner or the property owner will be $62 per year. For a $200,000 home, it'll jump up to $140 per year, and for a $300,000 home, it will jump up to $215 per year. And you'll see those same numbers across each scenario. So we've provided the scenarios for all 6 different funding options. Now this is a sample annual debt service schedule. And again, this looks at the $31.5 million financing, chosen simply because it's about the middle of the 6 options. And it shows the 30-year final term. And you can see there that the average annual debt service payment is going to be about $1.87 million. And if you go to the far right column, that shows that the annual tax rate will be right around 19 cents. And that's based on the equalized assessed valuation, the EAV of the city, which is the column 3rd from the right. And we assumed in our analysis that the EAV does not grow at all between now and the final term of the bonds, which is in 30 years. So now we're going to look at a sample tax bill. So the tax-paying constituents can look at a tax bill and see exactly where the increase in their tax bill is going to be. In this case, because the debt is going to be used to finance a library project, the increase in the taxes will go toward the line item that says City of Crystal Lake Library. And you can see in the right there then that the value of the property, in this case it's about $110,000. And then at the bottom, you'll see the actual amount owed for all of the taxes. Now this is a tax calculator. This is a tool that was created by PMA, and it will help determine what the taxes will be for a particular property. So you input the information in the green boxes. In this case, we chose a $200,000 home. The home is eligible for a homestead exemption, but for none of the other exemptions. We put in the projected B&I tax rate there at the bottom left, and it kicks out on the bottom right the $117 annual tax bill, annual tax increase, rather, on the tax bill. So that's all that I have. Sure. Yep.
All right, that was excellent. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you, George. Thank you to all the presenters. I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Lori Keller, co-chair with BJ of the facilitating team. So we're part of the group that has been organizing these events for you with the great help of the Crystal Lake Public Library staff. So thank you very much for that. And I'm sure that after all of those calculations, you'll be able to explain this perfectly to your neighbors, friends, family members, colleagues, right? Sure. So that's why we're going to spend some time talking to each other for the next half hour and working out what our community preferences are for the Crystal Lake Public Library. Couple of instructions for those of you who haven't been here with us for an engagement session before. Each table should select a recorder and a facilitator.
Okay, if we could have your attention again. It's important, your tables had very good discussions, but of course it's good to hear from our neighbors and to hear what they said. And then of course in a couple weeks' time, we will have all of this up on the website for you to view. Everything that's on all of these sheets will be up there as well. So, but let's get a sampling of what we have. First we have Deb.
Yep, table 2.
Come on over here.
Okay. We chose 4A, 75,000 square feet. And the top reason we chose it is that we thought it would demonstrate restraint to the Crystal Lake public, not the full amount. And we need to sell this option to Crystal Lake voters.
Okay, and one thing to change.
The things we would change about that is we'd continue to actively fundraise, seek private donations to fill in the gaps. So if we would go to 4A and that we would have half the computer, we can fill them in with donations and sponsors.
All right, thank you very much, Deb. Now, one other thing we're going to ask you to do as your table representative. Number one, I'll trade you the sticker for the blue sheet. And over on the side, Deb, you can put your blue library logo on the most preferred for your table. Oh. A little twist this time, right? All right, thank you. Come on up. We've got a second mic here. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. All right, this is table number 4. Our option was number 4. Top 3 things you liked about the option: starting completely fresh, community asset and attraction, and offer people more services and meet their needs. Items we wanted to see change, or we kind of said C on this option, was 4A option with everything from 4, new everything. A prominent facade and not have it overbearing to the surroundings on Crystal Lake Avenue and McHenry at that corner. And then keep the communication simple to the community. Address the bang for your buck simply, what you get for the tax.
All right, thank you very much. Take your blue sheet. Hello, how are you?
Good. So, there seems to be a trend going here a little bit, but table number 10, we suggested number 4. We felt that that would be the best option. We were, all of us, not opposed to 4A and 4B, but ultimately number 4 was the one we chose. Comments about that most preferred option. We felt that the preferred parking was best amongst all of the options, very community friendly, the layout. Energy efficiency, I think, would be a strong option here too, as opposed to some of the other ones. Not disruptive to current library during the process, and I think that was a big thing that we picked up on as well. And ultimately, it's not putting another Band-Aid on the problem, it's ultimately looking towards the future. The really only thing that we wanted to change or just make sure that this was brought to the attention to, importance of teen and young adult meeting area that's separate enough to not disrupt the other areas.
All right, thank you very much, Rick. I'll trade you. Blue sheet, the sticker. Just your top option, and then just one item from what you liked, and then one item from what you would like to change about your preferred option.
I'm Jake from Table 9. Our preferred option is number 4. The input from all of us over 4 sessions is most thoroughly addressed through option 4, and we were pleasantly surprised by the tax breakdowns. We would like to have consideration of the new south parking lot if it is going to be sold as an area for multiple school use, and could at some point it become a garage if more is needed. Just something to consider.
All right, thank you very much. All right, Kathleen?
Hi, I'm Kathleen.
If you want to step a little closer to this one, too. Thanks.
Kathleen from Table 12. We liked option 4. There was a lot of roundabout discussion, but that was the one we decided was the best bang for your buck. There's a clean slate, starting over, everything brand new, so it could carry us on into the future. And the one comment for things you might want to change is the picture with the playground. You know, kids, you put a play area and it can get rather loud, so we were hoping if it was there, it being there is not a bad idea, that there would be some walls or something to absorb the sound so there could still be quiet areas behind it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hi.
Hi. Table number 3, and I guess not to go against the grain, we like 4 also. One of the top 3 things was not having to move to a temporary library space on that option. 2 years in a temporary library wouldn't be a whole lot of fun. As far as things we would change, we're basically saying you're getting everything you want with option 4. Someone mentioned expanding the capabilities of a media room as something
we can put in there. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'll grab your blue sheet. Thanks. Hi, how are you?
Good. I'm Carol from Table 5, and again, we chose option 4. And the 3 things that we liked about that was the gradual adding of technology and furniture, also that all of our needs were met, and it was the best long-range plan and the best bang for our buck. And then the thing we would change is we'd love to see it under 30 million.
Thank you very much. Hello.
I'm with Table 6, and we picked option 1. Just kidding, option 4. Something we liked was this option accomplishes everything and could allow for some possible expansion. And something to change was we thought maybe there could be a cafe or coffee shop added to it to kind of give us that more community feeling. So.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Hey, Jim.
I'm Jim, Table 14, and bucked the trend a little bit. We were pretty well settled on 4B as the option, and we thought that it was nice and future-friendly, left some options open for us, and we thought one thing we would like to see is some more ways to raise funding for the future.
All right, very good. Thank you. Appreciate it. Ralph, how are you?
I am Ralph, and I'm Table 7, and I was put with 4 lively women. There wasn't another male there. We boiled it down to a very simple process. We want renew, and the reason for renew is the ground level entrance, the book drop off, and the Ames Room be enlarged. And they did want to put a caveat in there that they think this would be passable in the future with a bond.
All right, thanks, Ralph.
I don't know what number you want me to put.
I think that's number 2, isn't it? Hey, Jack, how are you?
Good. I'm Jack, Table 8. We chose option 4B, the replace but with the smaller size. One of the things we liked was the various size meeting rooms gave flexibility, and one of the things we might like to see changed is maybe adding some outdoor usage area for people to sit comfortably outside in the good weather, obviously.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We save the best for last, right?
Hello, my name is Corky. We quickly chose to replace, and that was most of our focus, and then we had to quickly split it up to 4A.
Okay.
So, but the minor differences between those 3 options. Our options of what we liked, it modernizes an outdated and replaces an inefficient building. The concern that we had was why the square footage? What if a smaller square foot building would provide many, if not most of the needs we had while reducing the cost?
Okay.
And we didn't have an answer as to a number of 50, 60, 65,000 square feet. So that's kind of where our concern was.
Okay, good. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Very good thoughts, very good suggestions, very well. At this time, I'll turn it back over to Lori.
We're so glad you were with us tonight. This is the home stretch. Here we go. For the last activity, and it's kind of on your way out, we'd like you to all take a look at this. I'm going to have somebody who's closest to the sealed envelope at your table to reach out and get that sealed envelope. We want to invite you to open that, and in it you'll find a sticker, a public library sticker for each one of you, because we realize that at the end of the day, this comes down to you, the voter, the citizen, the member of this community who's going to help us decide the future. So on your way out, if you would also add your sticker to the stickers up on the board. If it's different, it's okay. We want to know what your kind of vote is on the renew, replace, repair, expand as you are walking out tonight. And on that note, I'd like to thank everybody, library staff, library board of trustees, engagement session facilitating team, all of our presenters tonight, my co-chair BJ, and you for being here tonight. Thank you.